Hi, I'm Melodi Bunting. I am a CPA, a CMA, and a CGMA. I just like collecting initials. That's my thing. But what it allows me to do is develop expertise. And I have a background both in higher education and public accounting. And with that, I have been very fortunate to form into a position where I am advising nonprofits and doing a fair amount of client advisory trainings and coming alongside being that trusted advisor. So Wegner is really excited about this new nonprofit client advisory service capacity that we're carving out to, again, show the commitment that we have to the nonprofit community. The role of the board in the nonprofit is an important key position because they have the fiduciary and legal responsibility. Legally, they have three duties: the duty of care, duty of loyalty, and duty of obedience. But beyond those basic roles, the governance is really the captain's guiding the ship. And so it's important that that role of the governance board takes leadership and sets strategic plan. They're responsible for reviewing the CEO's performance, setting CEO or executive director compensation. It's important that they understand the financials. They're responsible if there is a fiduciary breach. Now, it's held to a reasonableness level. You don't want people to panic that they can't be on a board because there's this huge risk. But they have to use due care. They have to take it seriously. The role of the board can change over time. With a startup nonprofit, they take more hands-on of getting things going and operational. Once a board is past foundation stage, generally the board of a nonprofit is going to be more that governance and strategic leader and guidance. The board of a nonprofit should be setting their own agenda, should be calling their own meetings, leading their own meetings. The role of the chief executive or executive director should be as reporting and coming alongside and giving another perspective, but it's critical that the board is taking a guiding role. As the board grows and they move past the foundation stage, an ideal situation is that the board is acting as advisors and leadership to the chief executive officers. Now, the CEO or executive director, they're the operational folks. They're in charge of the staff. They're in charge of day-to-day operations. And once you have enough size to the organization, the board should not be in the weeds, not be involved in day-to-day and second guessing the executive directors or CEO's decisions. But the CEO and the board in an ideal situation have come together and have had that conversation where they're clear on what the strategic goals and long-term vision are and what the main objectives of accomplishing that and the guidelines along how that's going to be accomplished in a broad level are set by collaboration between the board and the chief executive or ED. But once that's set, the board oversees the executive's performance, but stays out of the executive's day-to-day. And that's a hard role because there can be abuse by executives. In a bad scenario, they're not involved and they're not aware of some of the really harmful, toxic things that that executive director or CEO is doing because they're too disengaged. So it's a delicate balance. When things don't go according to plan, what does that look like or what happens? Ideally, there's two big fallouts. One is communication. The communication link is broken and there's not clear expectations on governance to operations and vice versa. So they're operating with different agendas and expectations potentially and not clearly communicating with one another. This often impacts the staff in particular. One of the things that I often ask a nonprofit is, what's your staff turnover like? And if you did an employee satisfaction survey, what would that look like? Now, there's multiple factors to turnover and satisfaction, but if there is a unhealthy, dysfunctional relationship between the executive director and the board, it's going to be felt by the staff. And oftentimes it makes them really in a tough spot and hard to accomplish what they're supposed to be doing on a daily basis. It also can have fallout to the donors, because the donors sometimes will be hearing one message from the board and something different from the executive director. So those are the two primary areas with communication where you see this dysfunction. The other one is with financial accountability. The board is the financial responsibility, and they do need to be looking over financials and understanding what's going on. And you may remember one of the recent nonprofits that was in the news that was a big case was the Wounded Warrior Project. They're an example of actually having turned it around and they're coming back. But the board had let two executives that eventually were fired spend extravagantly before it became a public scenario. And without knowing all the specifics, obviously, there were parts of their fiduciary duty that must not have been accomplished for that to happen and to get to the level that it got to when it was reported. So a recent example of what's happened with a board and an executive disconnect happened at Black Girls Code. It's been in the news recently because 3 days before Christmas of 2021, the founding CEO was suspended. And information that's publicly available, it talks about conflict and we don't know all the facts and circumstances. But a couple of key takeaways from this being in the news is that relationship between the CEO or executive director and the board, that need to have leadership accountability. In this case, I don't know for certain, but this woman who founded it is a dynamo. And chances are she's taken the ball and run with it. And it was hard for governance to have an accountability or a role. So there wasn't a real probably handing off of the baton or a collaboration of that leadership piece. And the governance has to keep pace with where the organization is going. In their case, they had exponential, incredible growth. In 11 years, they have grown huge. And how do you intentionally handle that? I think that was probably also underlying the conflict because people didn't know their full roles and expectations. And it was hard to make the shift from grassroots to having much larger resources and capabilities. So it re-highlights that important emphasis on knowing your role as a board and having that key communication. We have great passion, obviously, for coming alongside boards, especially because one of the things with boards is there's consistent turnover, and that's not their full-time job. They're volunteers. So how do they really know what it is they're supposed to be doing? And some of board members are, entrepreneurial and researchers on their own, and they figure it out. Some have documents internally that pass it along well. But oftentimes it gets lost over time. And one of the key things we can do is come in and give some basic trainings on what those responsibilities are, both at a base legal level, as well as best practices. What does that look like? We can also help facilitate some of the communications that need to happen. Recently, we have an operating board of a very large food pantry that's still 100% volunteer. So this is an oddball case where the board is still operational because there aren't employees. And they came to us and we actually put together policies and procedures manual so that they would have documentation of what they were doing and an understanding without that connection of what their parameters were, both as a board as well as being operational in that case. Sometimes it's a different view on strategic plans and facilitating that conversation. Several organizations during COVID were incredibly blessed with huge gifts. And we've actually been working on creating some investment and reserve policies for unexpected funds that were not planned. And how do you now figure out those next steps? Holding each other on the board accountable. We have a lot of fun little meeting tricks as well as retreat tips. to help you facilitate communication and get some of the things accomplished that we're talking about of understanding role and collaborating as a team, as well as leading the organization. And we also have a lot of templates and examples that we can obviously pull in to help with that, but we're really passionate about making it work because that's a key element. It's exciting that these nonprofit client advisory services are available, and you can probably see some application to your organizations right now. And we'd love to talk to you about that. So please check out our website. We've got lots of great resources there, or get in touch with one of us. And thanks for taking the time to hear about our new exciting area.